You hear it all the time, right? There's a ton of anxiety swirling around the future of the US dollar. Is it about to lose its top spot? Well, what if the future doesn't look like a sudden crash, but something much, much slower? Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to wind back the clock and look at the last global currency to pass the torch, the British pound sterling. So, is the dollar's time up? I mean, this is the question that fuels countless headlines and a whole lot of debate. The idea that the dollar's dominance could be slipping is easily one of the biggest economic stories of our time. And look, this isn't just an academic debate. It has absolutely huge implications for the entire world's stability. And that right there is the heart of the fear. The Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz really nailed it here. See, switching from one top currency to another isn't like just swapping out one brand for another. It's a super risky process that could shake the entire global economic system to its core. So yeah, understanding how these transitions actually happen is pretty crucial. When we think about a dominant currency losing its crown, we kind of imagine this huge, dramatic crash, right? A total collapse. But the historical record, and especially the story of the British pound, tells a totally different story. And honestly, it's way more fascinating. So this is what people call the tipping point theory. The idea is that once a few big players start to lose faith and switch out of a currency, it triggers a landslide. It's like yelling fire in a crowded theater. Everyone makes a mad dash for the door at the same time to avoid being the last one holding a worthless asset. It's the absolute nightmare scenario for the dollar today. But here's the thing. That's not what happened with the pound. Not even close. Okay, so let's get into our historical test case. The decline of the British pound sterling. Well, it just didn't follow that script of a sudden collapse. Instead, it gives us this powerful counter-narrative, one of a slow, managed retreat that played out over decades. I mean, after World War II, it looked like a done deal. The US was the new top dog, economically speaking. Britain was drowning in debt, so pretty much all the experts at the time were betting on a quick, total dethroning of the pound in favor of the dollar. But here's the kicker. 2 years after the war, in 1947, the pound still made up a jaw-dropping 87% of all global foreign exchange reserves. That just goes to show you how deeply baked in the pound was to the whole global system. Its retirement was going to be anything but quick. And you can see the reality right here in this chart. See that bold line? It's not some dramatic cliff dive. It's a long, slow slide. Economists have a name for this. They call it surprising persistence, which is a fancy way of saying the pound just stuck around for a really, really long time. The sudden collapse everyone saw coming, it just never happened. Okay, quick refresher. What are we even talking about when we say reserve currency? It's basically the cash that central banks all over the world stash away. It's the go-to currency for global business, making it the bedrock for international trade and finance. Okay, this is a really important point. The chart on the left shows sterling's share of reserves shrinking. It was becoming a smaller piece of a rapidly growing pie. But now, look at the chart on the right. That shows the actual amount of pounds being held overseas. And look at that line. It stays pretty flat for ages. So what does that mean? It means countries weren't actually dumping their pounds. The whole global economy was just getting way, way bigger around it. So if nobody was panicking and running for the door, what was actually going on? Well, the evidence shows it was something much more orderly. It was a managed and negotiated retreat actively steered by the world's biggest economies. It was a process, not an event. Right, and this is the key takeaway. Everybody had skin in the game. A sudden collapse of the pound? That would have been a systemic crisis, a disaster for the whole system, hurting literally everyone. So instead of letting the market just run wild, the major financial powers decided to manage the process together. And it makes you wonder, right? Could we pull off that kind of teamwork today in a world that feels so much more divided? And, this wasn't just a bunch of empty promises. They built actual systems to handle this. Starting in 1966, the Bank for International Settlements, or the BIS, put together these group arrangements. You can think of them as giant safety nets. Huge lines of credit designed to protect the UK and to reassure all the countries holding sterling that they didn't need to panic. But the 1968 agreement, now that was the real game changer. It was basically a giant quid pro quo. On one side, you had the UK saying, hey, don't worry, we guarantee the US dollar value of your pounds. This completely removed the risk of the currency falling. And in return, all these other countries promised, okay, deal, we'll keep a certain minimum amount of our reserves in pounds. It was a win-win for stability. And wow, did this change things.
Suddenly, holding pounds wasn't just a choice you made, like picking a stock. It became a formal, contractual obligation, an official deal. This got rid of that whole rush for the exits problem. Think about that compared to today. Holding dollars is totally voluntary, right? Which is what makes people nervous. But back then with the pound, they basically disabled the panic button.
All right, so let's bring it all back to today. What can this story about the pound from, over half a century ago teach us about the US dollar? Well, it turns out sterling's slow, managed retirement offers some pretty big and maybe kind of worrying lessons for our own fraying system. See, the pound's soft landing didn't just happen by accident. You needed a very specific recipe. You had serious international cooperation through groups like the G10 and the IMF. You had these custom-built safety nets. There was also a huge boom in the amount of money floating around the globe, and high inflation, which actually helped shrink the real value of the debt. But maybe the most important ingredient was the shared belief that a chaotic collapse had to be avoided no matter what. So you've got to ask yourself, do we have that same recipe today for the dollar?
And that leaves us with the big final question. Think about it. The whole pound situation was managed by a pretty small club of powerful Western economies. But today's world, it's a completely different ballgame. If we were going to try to manage a soft landing for the dollar, who would even be at that table? It wouldn't just be allies, you'd have major rivals there too. So can a world this messy and complicated really come together and pull something like that off? Or is that scary tipping point we talked about at the beginning actually more likely this time around? That, my friends, is the multi-trillion-dollar question for the 21st century.